What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another installment of Best Armies in Warhammer 40k. This time, it is for the weekend of May 4th and 5th. May the 4th be with you, 2024. And this is going to be an incredibly important episode. Now, I am uploading a little bit later than I normally do. Usually I record and edit these on Sunday night and Monday morning, but I was traveling back from the Richmond Open, one of the largest events of the weekend, where I live streamed. You can go watch some coverage from the event over on the live tab on my channel. Maybe not day one, the internet was really bad, but day two came out just fine and had some incredibly spicy games of Warhammer 40k on there. So if you want to see some games using all of the new Minotaur Field Manual points and the new season's updates, then you can go check that out there. And that is what we're going to be talking about today, because this was the first weekend that we saw large events on Moss use the updated points value. So we get a really good look at what the metagame is going to look like throughout the coming season. So let's dive right in and talk about a metagame breakdown. Now, this wasn't the most populous event of the year. It wasn't a hugely... There weren't a huge number of GTs to talk about, but the ones that we will talk about are very important for the reasons that I said earlier. First up, Chaos Space Marines are coming back with their newly discounted index points. They are staring down the barrel of a new codex shortly. We're currently in spoiler season for the codex, so we're seeing occasional leaks and preview articles from Warhammer community, but they are still playing on the index for at least the next couple of weeks. They took down the Clan Wars Scottish Open as well as the Ragnarok Spring GT. We also see Classic Space Marines do fairly well with both Space Wolves and Black Templars taking down events. Space Wolves with Carnage at the Keep and Black Templars with the Snake River Open. Then things get a little bit spicy because Adeptus Mechanicus took down an event this weekend as well, that being the appropriately named May the 4th Be With You GT. Thousand Sons also have one win under their record, the Winchester GT. Grey Knights taking down the Lightly Salted Spring GT. Chaos Demons with the Saffron Walden GT. They also went technically undefeated, X0-1 at the Richmond Open, that in the finals game that I streamed on Sunday. And speaking of the Richmond Open, Necrons took that event down with a 6-0 record from Joshua Campbell. There were 4 undefeateds going into the 6th round of the event, the final round, meaning that the most likely result would have been 2 undefeated. But the other final round, the game that Necrons did not participate in, ended in a draw, leaving Necrons the undisputed winners of the event. That game was streamed over on Wargames Live. Both I and Wargames Live were at the event, and so there is lots of coverage from the Richmond Open for you to watch at your viewing pleasure. Last but certainly not least, Orks also saw some success with their new codex, taking down the Loaded Dice Open, although I think a lot of people were worried about kind of a tide of Orks doing exceptionally well, and that's not really what we're seeing so far. So it may be that the codex still suffers from the inconsistency problems that Orks have had in the past, where the roll to go first can determine a lot for the Ork list, and hard control matchups that have lots of movement debuffing effects, or just simply screening that can prevent their forward momentum can be problematic for Ork. But that might also remain to be seen as the season develops. And with that, let's dive into some lists and start with those Chaos Space Marines. Ewan Bedford Cooper took down the Ragnarok Spring GT. Yuan was running Cypher. He's a nice, cheap epic hero with a Vect effect, essentially a Calidus Assassin light. He's similarly good at fighting, has that CP tax, but is missing the uppy-downy redeployment that the Calidus Assassin can bring. We also saw Harkin World Claimer, the Raptor character. He can give Raptors a Hammer of Wrath impact attack style of effect, actually making large bricks of Raptors do kind of insane damage with that guy. He himself hits fairly hard, has some Battleshock Matters effects, but mostly just allows you to sink 6-ish mortal wounds into whatever he charges before his Raptor swing. And when combined then with the Dark Pact and buffs that Slaves to Darkness gives the army, those guys can take down basically any mid-weight target fairly easily. We saw in the battle line a Nurgle cultist mob, as well as 3 units of Slaanesh legionnaires. These guys are just here for some relatively inexpensive and fast melee objective clearing. They get wound rerolls when targeting enemies on objectives in melee, and with Slaanesh's ability to advance and charge, they can be fairly fast to run in and clear out those low weight scoring units. We then also saw a unit of Chaos Bikers to act as utility, and a ton of vehicles. A Predator Destructor, Venom Crawler, as well as 3 Chaos Vindicators. Now the Vindicator got a recent points cut Actually, across the board, all Vindicators got a points decrease, which has propelled them into competitive play. And this is certainly not the last time we're going to be talking about Vindicators in this video specifically. One combo that is often used in a lot of these Chaos Space Marine lists is planting them next to Abaddon the Despoiler to give them rerolls, plus a Chaos Hellbrute to allow them to dual trigger both lethal and sustained hits when they use their Dark Pacts. Alongside the rerolls, that allows the Chaos Vindicators to basically chew through essentially any target profile. They're high strength, solid AP, high damage weapons, so they're good at cracking armor. And with the additional effects of sustains plus the rerolls, they're also pretty good at blasting away lighter stuff too. That makes the Chaos Vindicators one of the most lethal short-range shooting platforms in the faction, and it's definitely a combo that we're going to be seeing moving on into the near future. We then also saw 2 units of 10 Possessed to add some very efficient melee punch. These guys get devastating wounds when they complete their Dark Pacts and have just a ton of multi-damage attacks for a relatively inexpensive points value. Those guys running Chaos Undivided to get wound rerolls from Profane Zeal. And last but certainly not least, the 10 Raptors for Harkin Wordclaimer to jump into. Overall, super cool to see Chaos Space Marines back in the competitive scene. They basically took a whole season off thanks to the insane nerfs that they received last season, but with the new points cuts that they received most recently, definitely back into the realm of playability. Those Vindicators add some incredible anti-tank shooting. The Raptors and Legionaries give a lot of horde clearing with high volume, high consistency attacks, and that is all buffed, of course, by their Dark Pacts and some solid utility units. While this list doesn't use it, you can also bring in Chaos Demon allies like Nurglings to add a little bit of Deep Strike as well, and the Chaos Bikers help shore up those tactical objectives fairly effectively. Now that moves us on to the sworn enemies of the Chaos Space Marines, the regular Space Marines, and we'll move over to the Carnage at the Keep event that Linton Rowan took down with his Space Wolves. Linton was running a Stormlands task force, similar to one that we have seen a million times before from Space Wolves, but with lots of new updates thanks to the new field manual. This list was led by Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf himself, to give you charge and hit rerolls for 1 turn. He oftentimes just rocks by himself because he's actually a fairly effective combatant too. He has a 3 damage melee attack and can just drop in, do some actions, and maybe kill some lighter utility units, or even beat up on a tank if your opponent gives you the opportunity to. We also had a lieutenant with combi weapon, 3 Wolfguard battle leaders on Thunder Wolves, as well as 3 Wolf Lords on Thunder Wolves, one of those with Portents of Wisdom, the other one with Hunter's Instincts to give his unit an earlier arrival from Strategic Reserve. Following that up were 2 infiltrator squads to prevent enemies from deploying too close or protecting the back line of the army. There is kind of a shooting core to this army, so having infiltrators to prevent enemy deep strikers from jumping in once the Thunder Wolves have pushed super far forward certainly helps in matchups where your opponent is relying on those repositional effects to get shots at your more dangerous hard targets. We then had 3 units of 6 Thunderwolf Cavalry for the boat of 24 Thunderwolf Cavalry, and last but certainly not least, 3 Vindicators. I told you this wouldn't be the last time I would talk about Vindicators, and they have returned, albeit in a more loyalist color scheme this time. These things are just such a solid profile. While they're not particularly fast, and they don't have a huge volume of shooting, they do have a big blast weapon, so that can allow them to clear out infantry fairly well, but they're also just lethal to heavier targets, and engaging them doesn't even prevent them from shooting thanks to their siege shield. They are also hard to kill. They have a base 2+ save, making them pretty sticky targets to take down. Certainly much harder to kill than the Gladiator Lancers that we would typically see in a composition like this. That definitely makes the Vindicator compete with the more Primaris vehicles on a 1-to-1 basis, and I think makes it a very, very tempting option for basically any variety of Space Marines. Moving on to another Space Marine chapter, Colin K took Black Templars to an undefeated record at the Snake River Open. Colin was running a fairly interesting Gladius task force. This list was led by an Ancient. Now we're delving back into the early days of 10th edition for the technology here, because I believe that this Ancient was meant to attach into the Army's Desolation Squad. Now this thing is not quite going to be as effective as the Desolation Squads of the days of yore, where you could take 10 models and buff them up with wound rerolls, thanks to Oaths of Moment. This one is only 5 models and only getting those hit rerolls, and those are 5 fairly expensive models, but that Ancient does improve their objective control characteristics. So if they are chilling on a home objective and just firing their indirect fire weapons, being essentially 12 OC, thanks to the Ancient doubling the objective control characteristic of that normally OC1 unit, makes them super difficult to steal the objective from. So even if you are coming in with Deep Strikers or reserves and coming in with charges onto the objective, you actually have to do some significant damage to take it away, and smaller utility units, especially OC2 utility units, certainly won't do that themselves. We then also had a captain with the Honor Vehement, a Castellan, High Marshal Helbrecht, and a Judiciar, alongside a Librarian with Phobos Armor and double combi weapon lieutenants. All on the characters this time around, which is a list archetype that warms the cockles of my heart. We had a single Assault Intercessor squad, oftentimes for the captain to join into to benefit from their wound rerolls and targeting enemies and objectives. An Infiltrator squad for the Phobos Librarian to join into, in order to make them essentially unshootable and uninteractable by enemy reserves. And I know it's going to be a question from the chat, so the Phobos Librarian is allowed to be taken in a Black Templars army, despite that being a flagrant violation of the flavor of the game, because the only restriction against taking Librarians in Black Templars is when they play within Righteous Crusaders. If you're not playing in Righteous Crusaders, you can take any of the Space Marine units that you normally have access to. Following that up were 2 Land Raider Redeemers. Those guys were full to the brim with Primaris Sword Brethren, a total of 15, 1 unit of 10, and 1 unit of 5. That 5 model unit could jump in alongside the Assault Intercessor squad. We continue to see Land Raider Redeemers doing incredibly well in this season, especially I think with factions like Orks and Necrons doing pretty good. The Land Raider Redeemers being a really dangerous profile to take the midboard of the table and clear out units that are pushing very heavily onto the Space Marine objectives certainly makes sense. Those things we're already going to see play, but I also think that they are probably going to be fairly effective moving on into the metagame of this season. It's interesting to see that despite the fact that the Primaris Sword Brethren did get a very hefty points increase in the Munitorum Field Manual update, they are still seeing play, and this is not the first time that we have seen Primaris Sword Brethren taken in multiple units despite their 30 points per model point level. They just hit so freaking hard that it is worth the points regardless. And so with that, let's move us on from Adeptus Astartes to Adeptus Mechanicus. Excited to see Adrian Lopez took the faction to an undefeated record at the May the 4th Be With You GT. Adrian was running a Skitarii Marshal with Veiled Hunter, that giving you a redeployment of up to 3 Skitarii infantry units after determining the role to go first. Normally, that is comboed with Clandestine Infiltrator to give a big unit of Skitarii Infiltrator and Scout, although we do not see that in Adrian's list. However, what we do see is a second Marshal with the Battlesphere uplink. That gives that guy the ability to move after shooting, meaning his unit can jump back into a Scorpius Dune Rider after making their attacks. Following that up was a Sidonian Scatris. I think this might be the first time we're talking about the Scatris on Best Armies in 40k, which is exciting. He was this tall, stilty boy, got a lot of discourse when the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex came out, and then ended up being releasing to kind of a wet flop of a datasheet. He's just a lone operative little guy who kind of cost too many points in the previous season to justify inclusion. However, he's now only 60 points, so you get a lone operative character for 60, which is just fine. He's able to hold down objectives, screen out areas of the table, complete secondaries, and do all of the normal stuff that you would normally do with a little lone operative character. So he's a nice little utility unit, alongside a Techno-Archaeologist for the 12-inch anti-deep strike aura that guy brings. The list then included 3 units of 10 Skitarii Rangers, and followed that up with tons and tons, as is the want of Adeptus Mechanicus currently, of Iron Striders and Taraxi. Well, we did have 1 unit of Cerberus Raiders to add a little bit of additional scout moving and forward operation to block enemies from moving. We then had 9 Iron Strider Ballistari, 20 Taraxi Skystalkers, 10 Taraxi Sterilizers, and a grand total of 11 Sidonian Dragoons, 9 with Taser Lances, and 2 with Radium Jezzails. The Sidonians and Iron Striders are definitely the headliners of these armies. They benefit from most of the synergies that Skitarii units get thanks to the Skitarii Hunter cohort. Those guys are then just backed up by the Taraxi Skystalkers, having a ridiculous threat range, being able to move quickly, fire, and then move again, even faster if they're near battle line units. That allows the Taraxi Skystalkers to work alongside these Skitarii Rangers and Cerberus Raiders to movement block enemies and prevent them from getting close to the Iron Striders, so that the Adeptus Mechanicus army can just continuously score passively over the course of the game. We then have the Taraxi Sterilizers to act as a little bit of a late game punch, because they will get some wound rerolls when targeting enemies on objectives and near a battle line unit themselves. Interestingly, no Dune Rider for the Battlesphere uplink to jump into, but we can just use that guy to double move forward by moving after shooting, or potentially jump back behind a terrain feature to fire and then remain out of line of sight. So still lots of usefulness with that enhancement, even without transports in the list. Moving on to Thousand Suns. Sam Nash took Thousand Suns to an undefeated record at the Winchester GT. Sam was running Ahriman on a Disc of Tzeentch, as well as an Exalted Sorcerer on a Disc of Tzeentch, and 3 Infernal Masters. Man after my own heart over here. I love the Infernal Master, one of them upgrading with the now more expensive Arcane Vortex. That being followed up by 2 standard Thousand Sun Sorcerers, one with Lord of Forbidden Lore, one with Umbralific Crystal. Those guys are tough to kill because they can't be targeted within 18 inches if they're attached to a unit. So that Lord of Forbidden Lore Sorcerer is relatively safe, hiding in the backline and just showering repeat casted rituals onto the rest of your army. The Umbralific Crystal Sorcerer can use his abilities more aggressively. He has one of the most wild offensive profiles in 40k. It is only range 12, but he can go anywhere from doing 0 damage to one-shotting basically anything in the game, depending on how well he rolls with his gun. To attach those guys into, we then had almost the maximum allotment of Rubric Marines, 5 units of 5 Rubric Marines, 1,000 Suns Rhino to put some of those guys into. Usually that guy can ferry the Infernal Master units around, or occasionally the Thousand Sun Sorcerers if they don't need their enhancements while on the table. And then those Sorcerers themselves can firing deck out of the top of the Rhino to continue to contribute to the fight while embarked. We then had 3 units of Thousand Suns Cultists to act as utility, and move blocking. These guys regenerate UCP when they die, so throwing them into the middle of the table to prevent the enemy from getting in on your Rubric Marines early is just going to net you additional benefits. And they have a scout move, so they're good at completing secondary objectives early. It'll be interesting to see if Thousand Suns continue to see success moving on into the season. I think that a lot of people put them as a really strong contender against Orks, and it depends on how popular Orks end up being to see if people will be taking Thousand Suns in order to defeat them. Obviously, I think Thousand Suns are pretty good already, so I don't know if you need a specific meta reason to take them. They just have a huge toolbox and are really cool to play, but they can punish some varieties of aggressive melee armies by slowing them down or move blocking them with their cultists. Moving on, we have the mirrored image of the Thousand Suns, the Grey Knights, that Chase Chappelle took to an undefeated record at the lightly salted Spring GT. Chase was running a Brotherhood Librarian with a Sigil of Exigence, letting him play a little bit more aggressively before jumping away in response to being targeted in order to get his Vortex of Doom out onto the enemy. A second Brotherhood Librarian with no upgrades, Castellan Crow joining into a huge unit of 10 Purifiers. Those guys rocking 4 incinerators and acting as absolutely brutal infantry sweeping for the army. They can jump up near you, unleash an enormous torrent of their Purifying Flame psychic powers, Stormbolter shots, and incinerator shots. Then, if you try to move up to melee them, they can just jump away and leave using Mist of Deimos, making them incredibly difficult to deal with. In order to add some longer range shooting, we also had a Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight, although no enhancements on that guy, as well as Kaldor Drago to be a little bit more of an aggressive melee force. We then had 2 Nemesis Dread Knights backing up that Nemesis Grandmaster, a Paladin squad, and a Brotherhood Terminator squad for the Terminator characters to join into. While Kaldor Drago does benefit a lot from the Brotherhood Terminators getting lethal hits on the charge, making him a very effective delivery system for those guys with his once per game charge buff, the Brotherhood Librarian is also a good attachment for the Brotherhood Terminators because as he blows himself up with Vortex of Doom, thanks to the leadership effect of the Psychic Hood, potentially save some of those wounds, but also then regenerate them with the attached Narthessium that Paladins do not get. In order to add some utility, you also had a Strike Squad and an Interceptor Squad. Super cool to see Grey Knight's list diversifying a little bit. They're no longer all Brotherhood Librarians or all Nemesis Dread Knights. They have a good combination of different effects. We have a couple Terminators, a couple of the Strike Marine squads, a couple Nemesis Dread Knights, and a couple independent characters. And it feels like this is one of those armies that would be photographed for a Warhammer Community picture. It's just a little sprinkling of all the different Grey Knights units, which makes it, I think, fairly representative of the Grey Knights Index. Now, interesting that we talked about Grey Knights, because we're now going to move on to Chaos Demons. Luke Townsend took Chaos Demons to an undefeated record at the Saffron Walden GT. Luke was running Bellicor, as well as a Bloodthirster, no enhancements on that guy, however, a Rendmaster on Bloodthrone, a Skullmaster, and a Grit and Clean one with the Endless Gift to give him an enhanced Feel No Pain. This list was very Khorne focused, so getting the +1 to hit from the Bloodthirster and all of the offensive benefits from the Rendmaster on the Bloodthrone were crucial to the list, and then having Bellicor in order to project A Shadow of Chaos aura to get those guys delivered into melee with easier deep strikes helped the list immensely. We had 3 units of 3 Nurglings in the battle line in order to complete some secondaries, a Plague Barrier unit to lock in some objectives and just be a tough to kill unit protecting your home field, alongside 2 units of 6 Blood Crushers, the maximum Blood Crusher units, and 2 units of 5 Flesh Hounds. The Skullmaster could jump into one of those Blood Crusher units to deal additional mortal wounds in the charge and enhance their Juggernaut attacks, and all of those could be buffed by the Rendmaster and the Bloodthrone, giving them +1 strength, EP, and damage on all of their melee attacks, making the Blood Crusher specifically very dangerous. You could be swinging with multiple 2 or 3 damage attacks, potentially even 4 damage with the Skullmaster in there, and the unit averages 1 mortal wound per model on the charge, getting somewhere around 7 mortal wounds on whatever it's going into. So those big bricks of Blood Crushers could certainly go in, clip into a character, blow them up, or a lighter unit, pile into further enemy units behind them, and if you have buffed your attacks against those units with the Rendmaster, they go absolutely insane. Chaos Demons had a fairly good weekend. Like I mentioned before, they also had an X-0-1 record at the Richmond Open. Despite the fact that they didn't see any buffs in the Munitorum Field Manual update, I think that they are looking pretty good moving on into the season, because they were already in a fairly good spot at the end of the previous season. Certainly not in the top of the game, but definitely where GW would like to see them in terms of playability. Now, speaking of the Richmond Open, we will also talk about Joshua Campbell's win at that event, going 6-0. I streamed some of Joshua's games on my live stream over the weekend, and I know Wargames Live streamed the finals game as well, which I heard was an absolute humdinger of a game. Joshua was running a Canoptek Court list built entirely around Canoptek Wraiths. I don't know if that's particularly surprising to anyone who has been following Necrons post the data slate, but Canoptek Wraiths only got a very minor update in the data slate update, with Technomancers getting in their points value increased slightly, making the bricks more expensive, but certainly no less spammable. With a lot of changes to the most used units in the Hyper Crypt Legion, Canoptek Court has arisen as probably the most effective list composition that Necrons have access to right now. This list was running Illuminor Seraz, a Plasmancer to jump into a big brick of 10 Immortals to add some infantry sweeping. This guy's getting 5+ critical hits thanks to the Plasmancer's attachment, and because he's a Cryptech, they then get rerolls as long as they are attacking inside your power matrix. That gives them an insane ability to generate additional hits from their Tesla carbines, and while they are kind of mid-strength 0 AP shots, they can clear out light infantry extremely well, especially since they also get wound rerolls when targeting enemies holding objectives. We also had 3 Technomancers, one of them with Dimensional Sanctum to give his unit infiltration, and a Transcendent Catan, almost entirely for its ability to jump into the opponent's deployment zone and deploy teleport homers for the entire game. Now, we obviously had 3 units of 6 Canoptek Wraiths to attach the Technomancers into, which formed the backbone of the list, alongside a unit of Deathmarks and 2 Locust Destroyers to add some utility. The punching power of the list came from 2 Canoptek Doomstalkers. These guys with high strength, 3 damage weapons that got hit rerolls thanks to that power matrix being Canoptek units themselves. And with the Canoptek Court's ability to make things unshootable outside 12 inches for a command point, they can win gunfights with even heavier anti-tank weapons fairly consistently. Now, this new version of the Canoptek Court does have a lot of kind of mid-weight attacks. The Canoptek Wraiths has Vicious Claws for their 2 damage swings, and we had some powerhouses like Illuminor Seraz and the Immortal Squad that could chip in a little bit of damage as well, but generally speaking, it doesn't have the most anti-tank. But what it does do is basically be super hard to kill and score a bunch of points really easily. The Canoptek Wraiths have pistols, and the Transcendent Catan is a monster, allowing all of those units to run up into the middle of the table or opponent's deployment zone, be engaged in melee for multiple rounds, use reanimation protocols and the Technomancer's healing effect to survive for longer than is expected, and perform actions while engaged in order to continuously farm points. And farming points is definitely the name of the game for this list. It did well enough in scoring to take down the event and score Joshua Campbell a massive brick of points. I think he only dropped a couple of points over all 6 games, scoring basically full hundreds. And that moves us on to the last event of the weekend with the newest and most exciting codex, Orks, being piloted by Jeff Jew, taking down the Loaded Dice Open. Jeff was running a Bully Boys detachment from the new Ork Codex. This is the Mega Knobs and Knobs focus detachment that allows you to call a second Wa after your first Wa. Jeff was taking Boss Necron, who can be taken as a lone operative, so he's hard to shoot at and can still use his once per game redeployment to hop around the table in order to complete your secondaries, making him an incredible scoring piece. A Pain Boy, 3 war bosses, and 2 Mega Armor war bosses, one of them with a teleporter to deep strike his unit, giving them a lot of flexibility with rapid ingress to then call the Wa and advance into charges where your opponent maybe wasn't expecting them. The other one with Big Gob. That one's a points filler that allows your war boss to yell at enemies at the start of the fight phase, taking a battle shock check if they're engaged with him and subtracting 1 from the result. It can make enemies turn off defensive stratagems or be unable to interrupt, or even flip objectives if they're high OC units, but isn't the most impactful enhancement in the game. We then had 1 big boys squad for one of those war bosses to join into. That's 20 boys, alongside 4 trucks to shepherd the smaller units into the fight, 3 units of Gretchen to act as utility, 3 units of Mega Knobs, 1 unit of 10 Knobs for one of the other war bosses to join into, and 1 smaller unit of 5 Knobs alongside 2 units of Storm Boys to also act as utility. Now, these Bully Boys armies, I think, are really the big headliner from the upgraded Ork Codex. They are very difficult to kill, with those Mega Knobs having access to an anti-ranged Armor of Contempt style of stratagem, plus that second Wa gives them 2 full battle rounds, benefiting from their 4+ Feel No Pain while the Wa is active. They can also do mortal wounds on the charge using Crushing Impact, get hit rerolls, or even fight on death, as well as get additional consolidations, making them hit fairly hard and accurately, and incredibly good at stealing objectives away and then being difficult to kill on them. A very straightforward detachment, but clearly it worked out because they went undefeated at the event. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which ones were your favorite, as well as what you think are going to be the most effective ones moving on further into this season. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.